So, we all know this happened. Donald Trump has been reelected as president of the United States, defeating Vice President Kamala Harris. So, he is the second time in American history a president will serve two non-consecutive terms. The first time was with Grover Cleveland. Poor Grover Cleveland, because his only claim to fame was like that little trivia bit, and now he doesn't even have that anymore. This is like the late 1800s, so like the Golden Age. It looks like it's about 312 electoral college victory, which is not a landslide by any means, but it's certainly not neck and neck, right? And it looks like, the votes are still being counted officially, but it looks like he's going to finally win the popular vote after three times. So, this is not a political show. I make my opinions on things very clear. I don't steer away from it, but I try to, the show is about film, media, and entertainment. So that's what I really want to focus on here, is how Trump's re-election, I should say, impacts those spheres of film, media, and entertainment. But before I do, I have to get on my soapbox and kind of give you my 2 cents on this. So, what this shows to me is that Trump's ascension was not an aberration. I think there was a sense that after he was defeated in 2020, that Trump was kind of, the whole Trump MAGA movement was a fluke, and the past 4 years since 2020 have just been a dying movement grasping at relevancy and vitality. That's not the case. American history can more or less be broken up into major chunks based off the kind of predominant political order. You could talk about the Jacksonian era, you could talk about like the Gilded Age, all these things. The New Deal era, which was then replaced by the neoliberal era with the dawn of kind of, more of a return to the pre-New Deal, kind of letting the markets do what they do. And again, the thing about political order is that both parties kind of subscribe to that political order. So because the neoliberal era is inherently more conservative, conservatives of the New Deal era were in some ways more liberal than the liberals of the neoliberal era, if that's a weird way to say it. So another way to say it is someone like Nixon is actually was in some ways more liberal, at least on economics, more liberal than like Bill Clinton, right? What we're seeing now is that his re-election now signals the dawning of a new political order, right? It has been, the death of the neoliberal order of American politics has been covered to death in the past couple of years, but no one really had any idea, okay, well, what's replacing it? So what's happening now is that neoliberal politics is being replaced by economic populism. And it's not something that the shift happened a week ago. The shift happened in 2016. And it's just now that we're able, in historical hindsight, to be able to identify that this is not a fluke. This is now a wholesale change in the fabric of American politics. And both parties faced this change. Again, the changing of a political order affects all the parties. Really, I should say the two parties in the United States. And both parties faced this quote-unquote threat at the same time in 2016. But the reason why, because the Democrats had Bernie Sanders, right? But the difference between the Democrats and the Republicans is that the Republicans were in a place of weakness. They just lost 2 elections in a row. So the party was in a weakened state, which allowed someone like Trump to kind of do a hostile takeover. Whereas Bernie Sanders, as much support and energy as he was able to muster, the Democrats, the party was just in a stronger place after 8 years of Obama. But the change is inevitable. And looking at these results, this whole situation seems like less of a victory for Trump and more of a defeat for Kamala Harris. She just could not energize voters in a meaningful way. And to be fair, neither could Joe Biden, but the hatred for Trump was so strong in 2020 that he was able to mobilize voters, but just in the wrong direction, right? So ultimately this came down to, again, reflecting this shift in American politics. So I firmly believe, obviously, this is a broad blanket statement, but in this election, voters did not embrace conservative values. They embraced economic populism. Even if it's fake economic populism, it's still economic populism. So what's this going to mean? I think Trump 2, if you will, the sequel, and this time it's personal, is going to be worse, right? Him and his cronies have more experience and have had more time to think about how to achieve what they want to achieve. And there's going to be less guardrails, right? Because, of course, in the original administration, there was this sense of having, like, the adults in the room, like hiring more classical, Reagan conservatives to kind of keep Trump in check. And that didn't really work out. Those people got fired or whatever. So the second Trump administration is not just going to be a repeat of the first one. It's going to be worse. So tying this back into, let me get off my soapbox now. So how is this reelection going to impact those three spheres that I cover here on this show: film, media, entertainment? And there's a couple things I've identified, some things that a lot of people are talking about, and a couple other things that, as far as I'm aware, I'm the only one who is bringing these to mind, right? So one of the big impacts is going to be loosened regulations, right? Which is going to lead to more mergers and acquisitions of these media and entertainment companies. M&A is inevitable as industries shrink and contract. And there's no better example of a contracting industry than the media industry. And we've seen that if you've been following my channel. I mean, this feels like the year of the Paramount Skydance merger. I feel like every week for like 3 months, I was doing some kind of story about Paramount and who they gonna sell to, where are they gonna merge, and all this stuff. So, but that's kind of, one of the few mergers that was really on front of mind this year, because the Biden administration, in his whole in the 4 years that he's been in office, the administration has been notably aggressive on antitrust. Really trying to enforce regulation and prevent these mega companies from getting even larger. And again, it's not just because he's the Democrat, so I'm not saying he's more aggressive than Trump. Like, he's been even more aggressive than, again, past Democratic presidents have been. So now that Trump's going to be in the White House, there's a sense that there won't be as much of an aggressive approach to dampen any potential, business combinations, right? And pictured above me here, of course, is everyone's favorite villain, David Zaslav, the CEO of, he should be the ZEO, the CEO of Warner Brothers Discovery, famously very anti-creative in terms of the way he kind of conducts himself as the CEO of a media company, famously canceling movies for a tax write-off, like finished movies that could release. They just decided, we'll just make more money in the write-off than we would by actually releasing it. Of course, he's very happy about this. And he's been talking about this for a couple of months about, hopefully whoever wins, it leads to a better regulatory environment for businesses. So he had a comment here once it was clear Trump had won the election, saying, quote, "We have an upcoming new administration. It's too early to tell, but it may offer a pace of change and an opportunity for consolidation that may be quite different. That would provide a real positive and accelerated impact on this industry that's needed," end quote. So his whole thing is that, this industry is not going to survive unless we merge. And again, that is a symptom of a contracting industry, that the only way to survive just is just become bigger and bigger and bigger. And I don't think it's just David Zaslav who thinks this, because, if you've been following the stock market since Trump was, once it was clear he had won, the stock market rose on his reelection, right? So clearly the market forces think he'll be better for the quote-unquote economy. And again, economy doesn't mean, the actual, like, if something's good for the economy, it doesn't mean it's good for society. It just means it's better for people already with a lot of money, right? People with capital. But nevertheless, the fact that the stock market rallied so strongly, personally, I could tell you, actually, let's take a look. I have a really bad stock portfolio. Like, I'm not particularly great at picking stocks, but that being said, my weekly return right now is like 5%, 5 or 6%, which is actually a lot for like 1 week. So, it seems like the economic sector is happy about this, or at least optimistic that this could lead to better results down the road. Another impact that this is going to have is a lot of companies self-censoring themselves. A lot of media companies self-censoring. So, you have all these companies and organizations that want to be treated well by this administration, or at the very least just not treated badly, or they don't want Trump to use the mechanisms of power to go after them and hurt them, right? So of course I did a video last week. CBS was being sued by Trump over, quote, supposedly deceptively editing Kamala Harris's 60 Minutes interview to make her seem more eloquent or put together. And also I did a story, I think it was maybe 2 weeks ago. Of course, Jeff Bezos, who's the owner of the Washington Post, killed the Kamala endorsement at the Post, presumably to, if not curry favor with Trump, then to at the very least just not piss him off. Because of course he's not really involved with Amazon as much anymore. He has Blue Origin, which is like his space rocket company. So he wants to make sure he can preserve or potentially, garner any future lucrative government contracts, right? So Trump won't have to use the government against these companies because they're just going to be too afraid to rock the boat. If you look back at Hollywood history, if you've ever heard of like the Hays Code, this was kind of like before we had like movie ratings like G or R or PG-13. There were no ratings. The industry just decided, okay, we don't want to be regulated by the government because if that happens, we have no control over it. We're going to self-regulate. And that's why for about 25 or 30 years, you had so many kind of saccharine, very safe, morally conservative films. The government didn't have to impose rules on what kind of content could be in major motion pictures. The studios did it themselves. So that's what you're going to see here. So I'm sure companies like ABC, CBS, ABC, NBC, like all these networks, especially like the legacy ones, from like the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, they're looking at Trump's lawsuit with CBS and going, if we can avoid that, that would be great, right? We don't want to have the president of the United States against us, right? Of course, he's already against a lot of these networks because they're more, quote unquote, liberal. But in terms of, like, again, weaponizing the machinations of power, right? And of course, you still have individuals that will be firebrands, right? Speaking out, either using their media platform or just, like, outside of it. But the overall industry, I think, is gonna be a lot more cautious and silent. Again, like I said before, because Trump, him and his team know what they're doing now, or at least know a little bit more. Whereas the original administration, it was just so chaotic that I don't think they couldn't really go after anyone really effectively. Whereas now they might have the framework in place to be able to do that. Another impact this is going to have is, again, those legacy media companies are going to struggle. And by legacy, I'm talking even just like basically any traditional television network. So even cable ones like CNN or Fox or MSNBC. And it's interesting because in 2016 when Trump was elected, liberal networks and publications, well, really all news publications, but particularly things like CNN or like the New York Times, they soared. They did so well due to the anti-Trump rhetoric, because that's what they wanted to say and that's what people wanted to read, right? Or listen to, right? If it was television or audio, right? But now, if they hadn't already, so many people have lost even more faith in these sources of information. Because now the liberal media, and again, I'm not conservative. I am very, very, very far to the left. So to me, the Democrats are conservative. So let me just say that now. So I'm going to use a phrase that usually hear conservatives say, but it's just a neutral term. The liberal media has twice now gotten it wrong. They was so sure that Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris were going to win, or at the very least that they were much better candidates than they actually were. So I feel like what's going to happen now, which has already been happening, but this kind of is like an additional catalyst to that process, is you're going to have the rise of more fractured, or maybe perhaps the better way to frame it is more diversified media outlets, right? So, I feel like even just the past 4 years, there's so many more podcasts, so many more independent newsletters, YouTubers, right? And you're going to see the further, you're going to see people flocking to smaller, more intimate, more trusted sources. rather than the larger media machine that, just exists. It's like junk food. It's just empty calories. You put on CNN, and they're just gonna talk and talk and talk and talk about, and there might be over an 8-hour period, there might be like 15 minutes of like nutritious actual content. But they just talk and talk and just say the same thing over and over and over. So I think we're gonna see, even though there's gonna be a lot of anti-Trump fervor, I don't think that's going to be directed towards these media companies. I don't think that they're going to benefit financially the same way they did in 2016. When people were like, shit, now I actually have to pay attention to the news. I can't just stick my head in the sand. Another question I have now, so now that Trump is in office, does TikTok still get banned? Right? So, of course, I did a couple videos on this back in the spring, and I think it was the spring and maybe early summer when all this went down. Of course, Congress passed a bipartisan bill that Biden signed, basically giving TikTok an ultimatum. Either, its Chinese parent company ByteDance can either divest itself, divest its interests from its American operations, or it's going to get banned in the United States. Notably at the time, despite Trump being the one who initially suggested a TikTok ban back in 2020, he, during this whole process, was saying, oh no, we shouldn't ban TikTok. We should ban things like Facebook and Instagram. And at the time, I said his reasoning in 2020 and his reasonings in 2024 are the same reasonings. Whatever's going to help him in the moment. So in 2020, he didn't like TikTok because, he was a China hawk. But now in 2024, he didn't care as much. He might have some financial kind of stake, not in TikTok, but people that help him might have a financial stake in TikTok staying in the United States. He also just has more of a axe to grind with like companies like Meta. So I don't know if now that the election's over, was he potentially just saying, oh, I'm against this ban because because Biden was for it, and so he just wanted to draw a contrast. But again, if you just take him at his word, seeing as he claimed to be against the ban, perhaps this could be reversed, right? And again, he's going to redirect those energies. He would much rather be spending that time aggressive on other social media companies, like I said, like Meta. And then another kind of thing that's up in the air here is, what will the content of content be, right? What kinds of stories are we going to be seeing in film and television going forward? Post-Trump was kind of a weird period because we got a lot of great art, but we also got a lot of very flaccid, kind of like liberal, like I saw a funny Onion article. It was about this election that was like, the Democrats are have learned from their mistakes. They're going to try to appeal to voters by doing a Lena Dunham-led Hamilton web series because it just encapsulates like kind of just this like kind of liberal kind of token social justice kind of ambitions, and rather than like doing the real hard work of trying to make change in your community. So are we going to see that? So I guess the question now is, are we going to see content that really leans into leftist resistance? Like, screw civility, screw, like when they go low, we go high. Are we going to see some real firebrand content? Or are these larger media companies going to read this election as not an embrace of economic populism, but as an embrace of conservative values? So is the content going to become more conservative, or at the very least not as willing to explore social topics, right? But the only thing we know for sure is that there's going to be a major focus once again on the Trump spectacle, right? There's a reason he was a reality star for over a decade on NBC with The Apprentice. That first administration, it just felt like every single day there was some kind of drama or funny, weird thing happening. And again, it ties back to my original question or concern or comment or whatever you want to call it. Will this administration be as chaotic as the first? It still remains to be seen. I don't know if it would be better or worse if they have their shit together, because if they have their shit together, that means that they can you know, they might be more effective at doing the awful shit they want to do. So I don't know, but in any case, this is the world we live in. I am not a political pundit. I'm just a media. I'm a media personality, if you could even call it that. Wow, what an interesting story. I'm sure you have some thoughts about the topic, so comment below, let me know what you think. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really, really helps people find the channel and makes me feel all warm inside. Until next time, I'm Peter Mancuso. Peace out.